Well, hello everybody. My name's John Johnson from NSF, and this is the latest in a series of webinars that we've produced for your entertainment and interest. My webinar today is going to be, I think, pretty interesting and innovative take on how you go from firefighting to fire prevention. So how do we actually reduce some of the stresses and strains that come from GMP non-conformances, recurring GMP deviations, and dare I say it, some of the recurring crises in the pharmaceutical industry. So before I make a start, I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar. We've got participants today from 21 countries, UK, Sweden, Ireland, Spain, Czech Republic, Netherlands, Switzerland, France, India, Norway, USA, Canada, Portugal, Germany, South Korea, Malta, Austria, Italy, China, Hungary and Belgium. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that we all want a better lifestyle. We all want a way of preventing crises, regardless of culture or geography. We all want to be able to do our jobs in a more effective way. So hopefully this is going to be of interest to you. Just bear with me a second. Just doing my own little bit of firefighting here to make sure these slides move on. So, we, NSF, as you know, are a Pharma Biotech consultancy company. We specialise in a range of training, auditing and consultancy roles, particularly for myself working on transformational projects across quality culture, remediation, improving quality systems, but most importantly trying to improve the performance of a business, improving the cost of the business itself, the cost of quality and the cost of doing things right first time. Also trying to improve the delivery and customer service and meeting the expectations in terms of delivery dates, but also of course in terms of meeting the quality and GMP compliance expectations of the industry and of the regulators. So those of you who know me, I've been a qualified person since 1995. I've held a number of senior positions across the industry in my 30-odd years in the industry, and been lucky enough to either prepare for, host or follow up on over 50 FDA and MHRA inspections. So I'm an executive director at NSF, and hopefully some of my experience will be useful to you today. So the first thing I wanted to talk about really was why do we bother trying to change anything anyway? Because making a change in life is hard, isn't it? It's not easy to make a change, particularly if that change you want to make is transformational or is a paradigm shift. But even though change can be really hard, it can often be remarkably rewarding, because change, after all, will help us grow as an individual and as an organisation. But changing something for the sake of it is always going to be wasteful. Not planning for the outcome you want is always going to be painful. So you have to appreciate that when you want to make a change in your life or in your workplace, it has to be properly planned, properly evaluated, but ultimately change is great, everybody, because I think it was my mother that said to me once that nobody, John, ever won an Olympic gold medal from sitting on a sofa. You have to actually go out there and do it. So the original idea of this webinar came from an article that I wrote for the journal at the start of 2016, where we wanted to make 2016 your year of prevention, not reaction. Because after all, living on adrenaline is a tough place to be. Now, in order for you to make that change, it's really important for you to know what's in it for me. How will it benefit me? How will it help me? How will it help my family or my co-workers or my colleagues and friends? And once you know what you're going to get out of that change, it actually makes the momentum that you need to make the change far easier to build. You actually start to overcome stasis. So how do you go about making a change? And what single message should you keep in mind? And of course, where can you go to get help? So, why bother changing anything in the first place? And I think this is a nice quote from Henry Ford. If you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you always got. And that was a maxim he used throughout his time in industry, manufacturing automobiles in the States from the turn of the century. And it enabled him to be an innovator. But actually, the fact that you're here at the webinar today is a great sign to me, because you're clearly open to new perspectives, you're open to new ways of looking at things, and those new ways of looking at things will help you develop better solutions and better ways of working. But first of all, how does it feel out there in industry? I mean, ultimately, there's a lot going on, isn't there? We've got a huge responsibility for multitasking. You're rushing around, you're making compromises on time. You're trying to do it all, but you're doing all of it at a superficial level. And how does that make you feel? When you add that to our meetings, when you look at many meetings that you go along to, doesn't it feel like hammer time? Don't you feel that things are sometimes being driven through without enough thought, enough planning, and enough thinking about how this might affect the future? Equally, don't you find that many of your meetings talk about the same subjects every week, where you're not actually digging deep enough to look at the analysis of the root cause? And by not knowing the root cause, don't you find that you can't actually generate the right actions, the right preventions that will make sure that that agenda item comes off the list? And what in effect happens is you talk about the same things every week, the same way, with the same outcome, and it's unfulfilling, it's wasteful, and it's distracting. So when you add these three things together, you've got an organisation that's continually hurrying, and an organisation where your staff feel frustration. And that frustration, I think sometimes, and you see this in people's eyes, you can see that they're looking out of the window and they're wondering, should I be somewhere else? How can I make it better? How can I avoid this round robin of events that are just so distracting? Because fundamentally, if you don't address these issues, you have these consequences. You have the risk of employee burnout. You promote fear. You get to a culture that is actually risk averse and doesn't want to actually innovate or take risks. You start to drive an insecurity in the organisation that leads to strife and pain and stress, restlessness and staff turnover. And we all know the incredible cost of losing good staff, then having to do a search, selection, recruitment, induction and training program to get those new staff up to the same standard as the experienced staff that left because of the organisation and culture of your team or your workplace. So there is really a massive cost benefit here as well in looking at how to go from firefighting to fire prevention. So how do we actually recognise this in the pharma industry? Well, what we're seeing in many companies that we work with is that, very different to perhaps 20 years ago, many people have a very short career or position lifespan. There is a lack of continuity of experienced people in key positions, which means that that deep understanding of a subject, that experience and expertise, is slowly being eroded. We see fear, and with fear you have the real risk that you lose the ability for innovative thinking, that people will go for a vanilla flavoured approach, a safe approach that allows them to keep away from any office politics. Because after all, why would you offer anything different if the management behaviours that you see around you suggest that those ideas, those risks, are either not appreciated or considered to be bad practice? So it's very important to make sure that your organisation has a blame-free culture and a culture that will embrace a certain well-assessed, well-evaluated level of risk. Of course, with risk aversion, you get a degree of stasis. You get poor management of change, or indeed, in the worst case scenarios, you can be in a company where actually no changes are allowed at all. With insecurity, what we see here is that you get a move towards short-termism rather than long-termism. And human nature shows that short-termism is very stressful, and it drives very reactive decision-making that often leads to very poor outcomes, because people do what they think is the right thing for the short term rather than the long term. And of course, when we're in our workplace and we see strife, we see arguments, we see very negative communications, we all know that those abrasive management cultures and interrelationships between employees will always drive the wrong behaviours and will actually drive problems underground. And ultimately, of course, this leads to staff turnover, lack of investment, but high costs in recruitment. And we see many times, even when we're working on GMP remediation programs, that it is the underlying culture of the organisation, the quality mindset, the mindset for doing the right thing at the right time to the right standard, is actually at the root of the non-compliance, rather than simply a change to a procedure or a training program. So we know what it's like at your desk. We've been there, we see it, we tackle it, we help improve workplaces, and we are expert in trying to do these change programs without eroding the relationships that you have in your organisation. So I think it's true to say that many firms would like to change this, but how can you change it? So let me ask you a hypothetical question. If I were to give you 15% more time per week, what would you do with it? If I was able to actually give you almost an extra working day back every single week for the rest of your career, how would you use that time? Now, turning this around a different way, if you think your line manager is going to increase your headcount by 15% this year just to make your life better, you can switch off now. But actually, I don't think that's going to happen, is it? We're all expected to do more with less, and it's actually very unusual for firms to be growing their headcount unless there is a huge, compelling, overriding driver associated with business volumes. So you're not going to get additional headcount from your manager just to make your life better. So how are you going to do it for yourself? Well, what would you do with that time? Well, many people, of course, would say, well, if I had an extra working day a week, I'd be able to get more work done. And that's good. It makes you more productive, it makes you more successful, and it allows you to grow. But actually, is that a good enough reason to make a change in your thinking? Isn't there something that you should get out of this program that is actually for you, that would make your life better, that would make you feel as if you're moving from firefighting to fire prevention? So I'm going to refer you to Bukowski. This is a nice quote from Bukowski. He said, "Find what you love and let it kill you." Now that isn't a literal suggestion, of course. What he really means by that is you should discover what you love doing and work out a way of doing more and more and more of it. So once you've identified those things that you love doing, just try and do more of it, and naturally, human nature suggests you will find ways of making the time to make that happen for you. And actually, this is pretty important for us from an organisational standpoint as well, because making more time for me, allowing more me time, actually allows you to refresh yourself. It allows you to think clearly. It allows you to take a wider perspective than what you would do if you're continually firefighting. So making more time for you, more me time, is very, very important. Also, you should consider that, in fact, we're all here for just a finite amount of time. And our time with grandparents and parents is incredibly valuable and can't be won back at a later date. Time is finite. And making sure you make time available for the people you love is very, very important. You know, I really regret missing my son's first school theatre production. And I'm reminded of it almost every time he puts on a play anywhere in the world. He always reminds me that I missed his first one. And I know I missed it because of an MHRA inspection. But does that really matter to him? And it's important for you to make sure you make the right value judgments so you don't live a life of regret. This next photograph is my daughter actually flying over Copacabana Beach. And I really admire the way she's taken to her new role, because she realises that she's got opportunities now that she may not have in 5, 10 or 15 years' time. So she's doing it now, and she's doing as much of it as she possibly can. Equally, if you can choose things that you love to do and do those things with other people, sharing your time with people, you also allow others to enjoy the benefit of your experience and your expertise. You grow them, you deepen your relationship, you work and share time with them, and they benefit from your expertise. And isn't that really what we try to do when we're training new recruits or training people in a new technique or mentorship or sponsoring somebody in a critical position? It's about actually doing what you do, loving it, and sharing it with others. And equally, I think it's important to allow time for yourself to be there at the moment when the big plays or magic moments arrive. So don't crowd out your schedules to such a degree that you actually may miss the magic moments. I've been watching this footballer now since he was about 13 years old, and I really wanted to be there on his first game as a professional footballer. And I was just so happy to be there at his first game and to see his first goal. And it doesn't matter what draw I may have had on my time, I'll never forget being there and seeing that man's look on his face as he scored that goal. So, make time and use that time well, because ultimately, at your deathbed, no one ever said, "I wish I'd spent more time in the office." I'm sure no one would say that. So, let's think about firefighting. Let's think about what firefighting feels like. You know, it's kind of exciting, isn't it? Because you feel wanted. You feel the adrenaline. You are the hero. You're a quick responder. You're needed, and you're needed immediately. And people respond to you quickly because you've saved them a problem. You've become a hero. And actually, that does feel good at times. But you have to bear in mind that firefighters are constantly putting themselves in danger. they have short careers, they have incredible stress in their difficult working situations, and that cycle of shock and tragedy puts them on a hair trigger. And they have to take special coaching and special measures to live a balanced life. And we will all recognise people in our organisations who are natural firefighters. But are they the people that have the longest careers, that do the best they can with their expertise and their experience? And do they really save as many issues as sometimes they create? So, what about being a fire prevention officer? Well, you don't see many fires as a fire prevention officer. It's mostly coaching. It's not a particularly sexy job, is it? Because you're actually advising and preventing rather than fixing the issue at the time the issue occurs. And when you look at any film, you always see that the hero gets the girl. It isn't the fire prevention officer. It's also interesting, of course, that smoke alarms have actually saved more lives around the world than any number of firefighters anywhere in any geographical region. So when you look at the figures, it's important to remember that fire prevention officers actually will save 100 times more lives than a firefighter over the same period in their career. Prevention itself is shown to be 9 times cheaper than putting the fire out, with less damage and less disruption to lives. So actually, why not be the fire prevention officer and stop problems at source? Makes sense, right? So how do we do that? Here are 6 really nice, clear tips on how to prevent issues in the workplace. The first one is that we always recommend to walk the job. Go to the real place. Use the gemba. Gemba means real place in Japanese. You don't solve issues behind a desk. It's important to go where the issue occurred and see it for yourself and talk to people about what is practical and what is useful to do to prevent a recurrence of that issue. You should always promote team huddles, allowing people to self-direct their work in small teams and actually give them some responsibility for preventing issues themselves at source. By doing this, of course, you're showing that you care. By asking questions, open questions, blame-free questions, you're actually looking at trying to develop a deeper understanding in other people's jobs, in other people's pain points. And people appreciate being recognised as having pain points. Being listened to is actually one of the most rewarding things that can happen in an interaction with your boss. So actually show you care by getting out of your chair, getting from behind the laptop and going to where the issue occurs and asking and asking and asking questions. Of course, it's important in our industry to be expert in quality risk management. ICHQ9, a fabulous regulation, a fabulous source of information on how to seek, evaluate and mitigate against risks, not just quality risks, but also against risks across the business. So being able to use quality risk management to focus hard on the right thing at the right time and to do the right corrective and preventive actions and evaluate those actions is absolutely critical. Of course, as I mentioned before, when you're asking these questions and trying to get a deeper understanding, it's important to be structured and thorough in finding the root cause to the problems. Root cause analysis really is a fantastic tool in being pinpoint in what has gone wrong, what caused it, what were the contributory factors, and what was within the error chain. And actually, I've used this myself with my children, with my wife, with my family. Mostly successful, not always, but certainly in the workplace, in the pharmaceutical workplace, always been very useful to use those tools and to practice them in real life. Another area that's important is to make sure that you understand what is behind human error. Human error can sometimes be a very convenient coat peg to hang issues from so that you don't have to consider any further actions. If you put your issue down to human error, then it is almost giving you license to do no more, to do nothing else to prevent it. But actually, by having a structured approach to human error reduction, understanding what led to the error, what behaviour or decision made that issue inevitable, often drives you to far more effective, more long-term corrective and preventive actions. Because nobody wants to make a human error, nobody wants to go through recurring error, but actually sometimes you need to use the tools and take the time and use some structure in developing the reasons for human error and eliminating them from source. Now this one I'm actually quoting from a previous colleague of mine, and he said to me, "John, you actually have one job, and that is to know your job." And at the time I didn't fully understand that, but actually as time has gone on I realise now what he meant was that we have to take personal responsibility for our own continuing professional development. We have to be obsessive in the way we develop ourselves, train and coach ourselves, and also obsessive in the way we develop people around us. Because ultimately, if you can develop yourself and your people, it will build trust and teamwork, and it will allow for delegation and successor and management. And ultimately, it will make sure that you're not the only person that can do a particular role. It prevents firefighting because you have other people within the organisation with the right development, expertise and experience to do the things that need to be done. And of course, ultimately, if we do have delegates around us who we trust, it actually makes more time for us to do the things that we really love. So, some next steps. The first thing I would say is be proactive in this. When you come off this webinar, give yourself 15 minutes to look at the six-fingered hand here. Think about these 6 areas and at least write one action for yourself, a personal action for yourself on how you can get better in each of these 6 areas. And also, how can you influence your others, your other team members in your workplace? Because, you know, fundamentally you can do this if you want, and you can not do it if you want. But I think this quote from Roald Dahl actually will drive you to think hard about how you might change your workplace and change your thinking. Because as he said, life is short, so live it. Love is rare, so grab it. Anger is bad, dump it. Fear is awful, so face it. And memories are sweet, so cherish them. So in other words, prevention is cheaper and less painful than constant firefighting. The dividend is time, and spend that time on better things. Spend that time on being more productive at work, of course, but also think about how you personally can get a dividend from less firefighting. Of course, we can help in a number of areas that will deepen your understanding of these 6 subjects. We run a number of internal and external training courses and also one-to-one mentoring services and workshops in these key areas. You know that already, and you know just how good these are. We also support and guide senior managers in making changes, transformational changes in quality culture, behavioural GMP, making sure that you see a return on investment that is tangible and measurable and valuable. Ultimately, of course, we'd like you to keep in touch with us. We have a website with our training programs on, of course, and we have a number of videos and webinars available for free that will help give you a kickstart in those 6 key areas. So please have a look at the web links here and leave us a comment on those outcomes and outputs that we've prepared for you. This, of course, is one in a series of webinars that we've put together for you. Remembering that NSF are a not-for-profit organisation, we care about you as an individual, and we care about the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry as a whole. So we've put together this program of webinars for free that are going to be available as this one is, and also available on YouTube and on our website. And as you look down the subjects here, you can see that many of these are actually looking to help you set the right quality culture and survive, be resilient, to set a mindset for quality and right first time. Of course, we do a lot of science-based and compliance-based programs and interventions as well, but we also do a lot of organisational development and individual coaching sessions as well. But these free webinars, should be of great interest to you as well, and we'd like to invite you to our next webinar, which is on the 20th of June, around making the right judgment calls. So, the webinars are designed to be about 30 minutes, fairly short and sharp. We'll record this, of course, and we'll make it available to you and circulate it via the internet. In a moment, I'll stop the recording and go back to the desktop. And if you've got any questions on chat, please feel free to ask me some questions. Of course, if you would prefer, by all means, email me your questions, and I'd be very happy to respond quickly, or via email or by telephone. So please keep in touch. Also, if you want to keep in touch via our journal or receive some of our brochures on our offerings, please feel free to contact us again. So, I hope that was of an interest to you. I think I've just about made 30-35 minutes. Thank you so much, and I hope that was useful, and keep in touch. Thank you very much.